Very precise, very proper.
DMF, we're not sure about whether they're serviceable or not. And have you got a pairs leading BA? No. Stardust at Jim, Spitfire and Hurricane at Edinburgh, Harry at Edinburgh, Red Arrows arrive at Edinburgh at 2:30 this afternoon.
Jet Provost, he didn't contact us till late yesterday, but I get the impression he could go in virtually any direction.
He can go in any direction.
Yeah, so so the pit special we've got from the north to the north.
Yeah, I'll keep my eyes peeled for him out coming out.
So we've got a plan then now, haven't we?
A cunning plan.
Cunning plan. But it does actually finish on time because the Red Arrows are on a timed performance and they're into their TRA at 4:30 and that goes off until 2 minutes past 5. If the Gullib doesn't come,
Ladies and gentlemen, waving at us. Well, those of us would have it. Helicopters are got weapons stationed to the side. Torpedoes, depth charges. A nice rolling landing. And after the free fall, as you can see, once the canopies are deployed, it will take them just over a minute for them to the nature of the canopy, the parachute, is such that they can exhibit great control over it, allowing the precision drop such as this. The DZ here at East Fortune is comparatively small, but as you can see, they got it well inside. And by changing the shape of that airfoil canopy, they can be exceptionally precise. 12 men down in a very small space in double quick time. Ladies and gentlemen, the Royal Air Force Parachute Demonstration Team, the Falcons.
Let me tell you a few secrets about these lads.
From the south, ladies and gentlemen, the F4F Phantoms, the German Air Force. A considerable coup bringing those aeroplanes here to us today. So, sadly, very quickly, the Phantom, a very prominent part of European air space for a very long time, is now a rarity. More's the pity.
Right, the aircraft I've been flying this weekend is a Mark V AB910. Built in 1941, it saw service throughout the war with several squadrons, but there was one incident that occurred which was rather strange. It was common practice during the war, especially on grass airfields, if the weather was rather inclement, very windy and gusty, to sit someone on the tail of the aircraft to keep it down whilst taxiing it. Well, one young lady, an SACW Margaret Horton, was sat on the tail of the aircraft at Hibblestow in Lincolnshire whilst it taxied out. The pilot did his run-up checks as normal, but following that, I think she just forgot to get off, was reading a good book or something like that, and just happened to stay on the tail. So he went up to full power and started trundling down the runway, at which point she decided that it was far too difficult to get off, probably going to hurt herself, so she flung herself over the fin to hold on, and he got airborne with her on the tail. He flew a complete circuit, oblivious to her on the back, but knew there was something wrong, and apparently no one on the ground knew about it either, until he came round after a full circuit, landed, and she came tumbling off in a heap as the aircraft came to rest.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, to turn to the south, we'll turn up the noise. Eddie Todd in the Hunting Jet Provost T4. Actually, I could say turn up the noise. Its engine is a Rolls-Royce Viper turbojet, and if you've been very cool, Jet Provost was a faithful trainer in the Royal Air Force and other export customers. There was a legend about it that the throttle had absolutely no impact whatsoever on the performance of the aeroplane. If you moved the throttle, all you did was change the noise. But Eddie's showing otherwise. Highly agile airplane. Designing a trainer is a critical matter in that it has to be docile enough to get the basics of flight across to its pupil, but also it has to have certain unforgiving characteristics so that it would bite. If the airplane was too easy to fly, then complacency sets in, and complacency is not a thing in any aspect of aviation, be it civil or military. Eddie Todd is now in his 9th airshow season performer on the JP, and knows it very, very well indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, our next aeroplane is a very significant one in very many ways, more ways than I dare ponder. It's the only flying Bristol Blenheim anywhere in the world. So in the dark days of 1940, Blenheims represented a major part of our offensive and defensive capability. Blenheim 1Fs became the better of the all-weather fighters, or I say all-weather, poor-weather fighters, packing punch from 4 machine guns in a pack under the belly, and experimented with early air intercept radar. Meanwhile, Blenheims and the bomber guys, such as this one, were taking the fight back to the enemy occupied continent. raids against a highly superior enemy, the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt 109s, and even the twin-engine Messerschmitt 110s being more than capable of giving great punishment to the Blenheims. But they represented a light strike force that we so desperately needed. After an 11-year restoration, the first Blenheim took to the skies. In 1987, and survived a mere 6 weeks before a cruel accident at Denham in Buckinghamshire robbed us of a flying Blenheim. The team, gutted by the loss of their source of devotions for so many years, decided something that was quite heroic. They were going to do it all again. And that is in what they did in double quick time. This aeroplane that you see in front of you, India Victor, was put into the air, sourced and restored and flown. She made her first flight on May the 18th, 1993, from Duxford. John Romain, pilot now, in his earliest days on this Blenheim, as he would admit, was a sprog who was quite happy to be filing rivets and anything else at all. He's now a very, very skillful pilot, and so he should be remarkably at ease for this aeroplane. John Romain, as the pilot, knows every last nook and cranny of it. Nice, fast flyby, dipping the wing to give you the upper surface on the Blenheim. And the next aeroplane to perform is making its leisurely way towards us. It is the ultimate in gentleman's aerial carriage, and it's operated by the historic flight of Aer Lingus Irish International Airlines. The aeroplane is in the colours of EINBI, it's its registration, and that aeroplane is very dear to Aer Lingus's history, in that it's the first aeroplane that they ever had, and it inaugurated their first service from Dublin to Bristol in May 1936. Ladies and gentlemen, coming in from the north, the Aer Lingus DH-84 Dragon, and this is a one that the pilot in his little cockpit at the front can see you all very well. Let's give an East Fortune welcome. Let's have a wave, a ripple of wave as he comes down the flight line. That's it, superb. Delightful sound. Here she comes, Ola, the DH-84. See a twin bay biplane. Lots of bracing wires to hold it all together. Very ably displayed for us. There is of course a joke about whether those crossing bracing wires are all in the right place. And the joke is that if you've got them all tightened and all where they should be, you should be able to release a bird in between the wires, and if it can't get out, you've got it right. This aeroplane here, Ola, has a great affinity with November Bravo in the hangar here, because the Museum of Flight, as part of their bush flying display, has a DH-84 inside the hangar. And I have to say, one of the dummies, or do you call them mannequins, that stands next to the aeroplane is the dead spit of Joanna Lumley. It's going to make one more pass from the south to the north, and I think yet again, folks, we could go for a highly coordinated wave on this. Ladies and gentlemen, rolling in from the south, Ola, the Aer Lingus DH-84 Dragon. Give our pilot a wave as he comes past. Quite exquisite display. Gentlemen's aerial carriage. And the ladies, of course, as well. Oh, the wing waggling goes on. Aren't we all polite? Superb. Ladies and gentlemen, sun glinting off his wing. You can hear already the Packard Merlin engine, P-51D. Ladies and gentlemen, the Scandinavian historic flights Mustang. Coming in now, full chat from the south.
Because its range, its endurance, the making ability of the 98, that was the B-17s and the B-24s, the speed to their targets to... Look at that, shining high against that beautiful sky. The top traffic. While sun shines, ladies and gentlemen. That's the orchestra. Building representative from Millenium.
Recently been repainted to represent Detroit Miss. Detroit Miss, the original, was flown by Second Lieutenant Urban Drew. He flew with the 375th Fighter Squadron with the 8th Air Force out of East Anglia, and his main claim to fame is that using the P-51D he managed to down two Messerschmitt 262 twin-jet fighters, proving that jets may have made their arrival in 1945, but they were a long way behind the capabilities of a good pilot and a P-51D. The best quote I can give you on the Mustang is from no other than the infamous Reich Marshal Göring, who ran the Luftwaffe. His quote is that when I first saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew that the war was lost, and he was quite correct. The agility of the aeroplane was to be proven in battles with Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs as the B-17s and B-24s tried to get to their targets in daylight. And of course on the way back home, the escorting P-51s had sufficient punch from their 6 machine guns to acquire targets of opportunity, as they're called, carry out a lot of damage to motor vehicles, railway locomotives and trains on their way back home to their bases. The black and white stripes that you can see now underneath Detroit Miss are conspicuously markings put together for the D-Day operations. All the Allied aeroplanes carried those invasion stripes, as they were called. It was to help the troops on the ground see who were the good guys and who were the baddies. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Gent, Scandinavia historic flight, P-51 Mustang, a superb display. Swallowed up my dog. Dave Nesbitt, and he won't object if I say that, Dave, your undercarriage is slightly different from mine.
Yeah, I'm actually disabled, you know, after a bike accident in 1983. Yeah, so I use a wheelchair now.
You are decidedly mobile in 3 dimensions, and that's courtesy of the Scottish Gliding Union and your own determination and skill, I would assume. Tell us about it.
Well, I started to sort of glide in May last year, and after about 43 flights, I went solo, luckily, and that's thanks to the Scottish Gliding Union, and they have a modified high-performance glider, an ESK21. The glider's modified so that you can use the like a hand lever in place of the foot controls, but it still has the foot controls there.
David Nesbitt, pleasure meeting you. Thanks for coming along, and I admire your skills tremendously. Thanks very much for sharing it today.
Okay, I'm Janet Davidson. I'm the pilot of the Nanchang. This is a Nanchang. This was built in 1967 and I bought it back in November. It's a Chinese fighter trainer, and I actually bought it from a guy who lives in Yorkshire, that well-known centre of Chinese aeroplanes. And it's great fun to fly. It's all metric, so its cruising speed's about 260 kilometres per hour. It's a 9-cylinder radial engine. And what else can I tell you? I think that's about all.
Okay, can you just...
We're waiting the arrival of a taste of the Orient, a Chinese-built aeroplane, a Nanchang CJ6. This is flown today by Janet Davidson.
Large aeroplane, my memory doesn't hold such things in its head. Wingspan's quite considerable. 33.
Produced in numbers that the Chinese will never quite give us, but perhaps as many as 800. This is the basic trainer of the Chinese Air Force, and is still in service with them and is going to be staying with them for a considerable time. But they have allowed dribs and drabs out onto the collector market, hence this one. Rolling in from the south, nice growl out of the Nanchang. Wingspan's quite considerable, 33 foot 4 inches, and of course my instant metrication means that's 10.18 meters. I defy anybody to say otherwise. Flaps down, showing off that Chinese Air Force marking, which is wholly realistic to the aeroplane.
Carriage down, nice slow roll. Often called the Chinese yak. You see a yak trainer later on. 2 foot more the sea. This is the both parts.
Radial engines remind us of World War II. You saw the beautiful Bristol Mercuries on the Millenium earlier, and I think you're taken by that when you see this aeroplane. Big radial on the front, therefore it's going to be old. Not the case. The Nanchang is a child of the 60s. As indeed we say goodbye to Janet.
Hold such things in its head. Wingspan's quite considerable, 33.
To the south, 2 biplanes, 2 Boeing Stearman biplanes, 2 very special Boeing Stearman biplanes. They've been adapted with 750 horsepower Pratt & Whitneys instead of the normal 220 horsepower, but much more importantly, they are carrying a very special cargo, a self-loading cargo, wing walkers. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the St. Ivel utterly, butterly flying circus. And on the top wing are our two wing walkers. On goes the smoke, they can see you, they're waving, why aren't you? Come on, give them a wave, the utterly flying circus. And they keep waving throughout. I think if I was up there, I'd spend most of my time gritting my teeth and praying that I was back on the ground. All sorts of record-breaking feats in the air. The most amazing they've ever done is catching hold of a baton between them. One aeroplane inverted. That was about 15 feet long. Quite an incredible achievement.
Imagine them passing that baton.
5 million packs of Utterly Butterly, and I saw it on the pack of Utterly Butterly. You know, anyone come for a job for a wing walker. They had 10,000 applicants. Then they narrowed it down and picked two girls to be the team this summer. But it does get very, very scary sometimes when you do the climb up from the cockpit onto the wing, and then do the show, and then after the show climbing back into the cockpit. You've got a safety wire because you've got a harness on, but it's still, you get a lot of prop wash and a lot of wind, even though the plane's slowing down to 80 miles an hour. You do get a lot of wind, and so you have to hold on for dear life, basically, until you're strapped up onto the wing.
Becky made quite an amusing comment. The aircraft slows down to 80 miles an hour before she climbs out. I laughed at that because if you can imagine what it's like to stand on the back of a motorcycle at 80 miles an hour, standing up, you know just what sort of a wind pressure that is. So they work seriously hard to climb up even at 80 miles an hour.
When you're up there, you're completely strapped in, but you just got a lot to cope with. You've got a lot of noise, you've got a lot of wind, but on a beautiful day like this, you can see the crowd so closely, and it's marvellous because you can see them all waving, and it's brilliant. Really brilliant.
It's rather like having a huge air brake up there. Suddenly your aeroplane, which is relatively clean, although bearing in mind it's a biplane, so it's got a lot of drag anyway, suddenly becomes a very draggy aeroplane with somebody else on the top. I have to say, Becky, of course, is a great size. She's the diminutive windwalker. I mean, it's perfect size. So she's less of an air brake than most people. But you really are aware you have to trim the aircraft to adjust for that sudden air brake that goes out. But once she's there and established, we can just get on with the show and it's fine. Well, we're very happy to come up to East Fortune. It's a great location. We've got the perfect weather for it. We're really pleased to be here.
And it's lovely when people do wave, because you're working really hard to wave against 100 miles an hour wind, and it's tough, really, really tough. So it's really nice when people do wave, because you kind of get the response back, which because you're working so hard for them, and then to get the response back is wonderful.
Building the NG over the top. She must get a good view from there. Still managing to wave. Round she goes. Now all she can see is East Fortune rushing up at her. Again, they're waving at you, they're off the ring. Ladies and gentlemen, St. Ivel utterly Berkeley too. Very good variety of shapes of aeroplanes for you today. And the next one may look at times a little portly, but it is a 30-seat airliner, but it's actually the height of modern day aerodynamics. It's the Fairchild Dornier 328. The man at the controls of our Scott Airways Dornier is a former Tornado pilot, but I hasten to add, should you want to fly with Scott Airways, just as you're opening your in-flight food, do not worry. You will not start rolling the aeroplane. And here it comes from the north, Scott Airways Dornier 328. 30-seat commuter airliner, and very recently transformed. Instead of the turboprops that this one has, Pratt & Whitney Canada PW1198s, for those that wish such data, it's now powered by jet turbofans instead, and they've called it, with great predictability, the 328 Jet. And the 328 Jets is the start of a major series of jet airliners being produced by the German-American Fairchild Dornier concern. Operating out of Dundee, Scott Airways are developing a whole series of routes. Cruising speed on the Dornier is 335 knots, it says in my notes. It's a nimble performer with a range of around 840 nautical miles. Fully retractable undercarriage, landing lights on. And the carriage tucks away into those bulges at the bottom of the fuselage. The distinctive whistle of the turboprop, which is essentially a jet turbine driving propeller blades. And the flaps down as well, generous area of flap. The 328 capable of flying into a wide variety of airfields. And as you can hear, very pleasant on the ears, not a noisy aeroplane at all. Yes, this is going to be a high-speed run from the south, ladies and gentlemen. Fairchild Dornier 328, Scott Airways.
I left the Air Force as a flight lieutenant, and soon after joined Scottish Aviation as one of their 2 test pilots. I, along with John Blair, who was my boss at the time, we flew this aircraft, and he flew it at Paris in the air display, and I took it to funny places like Denmark and Austria, and tried to interest their military in buying the aircraft as a military trainer. In 1970, when we were doing this, the belief that you could put students into a jet provost or some other basic jet trainer and teach them from ab initio had begun to evaporate. It's certainly something you could do, and there were a lot of students who did do their first flights in jet provost, but it's a very expensive way of going about things. And at that stage, I think the powers that be had come to the conclusion that you would at least weed out those who were not going to make the grade in an aircraft like this. Our principal competition, as I saw it at the time, was the Swedish SF-260, which was a similar aeroplane, only with shoulder wing and rather less room in the cockpit. And it was significant, of course, that the Swedish Air Force bought this aircraft in preference to one made in Sweden. So that was something of a triumph, and even the Ministry of Defence of the time at that stage couldn't, I think, fail to buy this as their new trainer. It was a few years later before the Ministry of Defence put in an order for the Royal Air Force. By that time, The Swedes had already had about 80 of them, and the Malaysian Air Force had 15, and the Nigerians had, as far as I remember, their order was for 35. So the Royal Air Force was came fairly late as a customer. We'd already clinched the deal with the Swedes, so we decided to make it Scottish, and we put the Land Rampant in the middle, and it's more or less been there ever since. And we say that it's the only aircraft that belongs to the Scottish Republican Air Force.
Starduster 2, and Lou Stolp's idea was the classic planes of the 1930s and 40s. The undercarriage is reminiscent of the Youngman, the Booker Youngman. After the cockpit and the empennage is the F-4B-4 Boeing fighter from the 1930s. It was a shipborne fighter. The wing is completely Lou Stolp's idea, the beautiful elliptical shape. So it was there's an airplane reminiscent of the 1930s, but modern materials and designed in the 1960s. This particular one was built by a man called Carl Johnson, finished in 1975, re-engined with its present motor in 82. This is 200 horsepower. It's a Lycoming, which is a horizontally opposed 4. It's injected, fuel injected, so it has no problem with upside down as far as the petrol is concerned, and it's fitted with a Christensen inverted oil system, which is basically a cylinder and ball bearings that move, so it's an inverted. The oil still pumps. There's a sump in there as well. So it's got an inverted oil and fuel capability that we require for the inverted stuff. Wooden construction, the wings wood, the fuselage is steel tube, and the braced, very light construction, and the strength of the wing is in the bracing, these wire bracings, which form a truss, the Warren truss, and make the aeroplane incredibly strong. It's stressed to 9 as an ultimate load, and a working load of 6 positive and 6 negative Gs.
This is aerobatics par excellence. This is the Microlease Extra 300 in the hands of an incredible aerobatic pilot, Brian Lacomba. Extreme aerobatics from the finest there is. Ladies and gentlemen, Microlease Extra 300.
Upside down, flick, 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 flick.
lots of power. Big ailerons allowing it to twist and twist and twist through the sky. Brian isn't enthralling audiences like this. He's actually a very good novelist. He has a superb novel published many years ago, which I recommend to you, called Talk Down. Talk Down, folks. The plot, and I'm giving it away now, the book was an instructor pilot had an illness and was rendered unconscious in the aeroplane, and an air trafficker in some 6 or 7 chapters talks down the student. And the press panned the book and said completely impossible. Brian took, I think from the Daily Mirror, a reporter up and in circuit at Elstree fainted and just decided he would play the game and became immobile. And the somewhat terrified journalist was patiently spoken to by the tower, and just as the book quietly brought all the way down to the ground. So the paper, I think, eventually said that the book was very, very good. A waggle of the wings, Brian Lacombe, we thank you for a superb display.
My name's Taff Smith. I fly for the Real Aeroplane Company Limited at Breaton Aerodrome in Yorkshire. It's a Mark 11 Spitfire. It's the only one flying in the world. It's a very rare aeroplane. It was built in 44 at Aldermaston and flew in 45 over Germany and occupied France. It did 50 missions and was chased by Me-262s and Me-163, so it's quite a famous aeroplane. It's painted pink because it's a low-level 16 squadron scheme to protect it for PR reconnaissance work below cloud, and also it's a good colour for landing last thing at night or taking off early in the morning, when as an unarmed aircraft it would be vulnerable to fighter attack.
My name's Brian Brown and I've been flying it most of the season. This is a Hawker Hurricane. It's one of only 8 flying in the world. There's 6 in the UK flying these, 1 in New Zealand and 1 in America. She's painted in night fighter black, as you've probably seen from the earlier shots of the video. She's a Mark 12B, which was built under licence in Canada in 1943. It never actually came back over to Europe. It was actually used on coastal defence during the war, and after the war it was basically lost and found in a farmyard back in 1982. It was then bought by a company called AC Cars, who brought the aircraft back to England and restored it at Brooklands, and it first flew in 1996. It's now owned by Robert Fleming, and it's based at Breaton Airfield in Yorkshire, and this season it's been operating with a duo with the Spitfire.
Ladies and gentlemen, full throttle.
right, south of log 11. A9, that way, left. Nav points, please.
9, would you deputise, please? Number 5, would you go to display on 118.125?
Of course.
The Harrier is on
118.125?
118.125.
Yeah.
It should be on you. Oh yes, it's the only one. Oh, that map I haven't done. 4 goes to Fife, please.
Yep.
We'll start on ground 12175, go to tower of 1187, and then go to radar, which is going to be our RIS and the collector on 128.975. On the return 5, will you do tower 1187? That's just a quick handover.
31, which is 90 k's. Sight. The elevation is 66 feet, which is -2 on the QNH. However, there's a bit of lumpy ground around.
2,000 feet, so we'll probably be scooting underneath him as he returns.
The red arrows.
Having entered the middle of the